Welcome to the Band of One podcast. I am Freddy. We're delighted you've joined us today. This podcast is for anybody that wants to become a solo performer or become a more successful solo performer. And we're going to give you the tips and tricks to do that. I have over 50 years of professional experience as a live performer, and I'm also going to share tips and tricks with everybody else that I know that's done this in their neck of the woods. I hope to make this actionable and fun, so if you haven't already done so, subscribe and let's get busy. Today is a guest I've looked forward to talking to for some time. This guy I've admired from a distance and looking forward to catching up with him today. The one and only award-winning Freddy Tripp.
Hello, Riley. Great to hear you. Great to be talking to you and all your listeners as well.
I've looked forward to this for a long time. A little background. I lived in North Carolina for many years. In fact, I began my professional performance career with a band out of Dunn, North Carolina called the Men of Distinction way back in 1973. And I know that we've kind of crossed paths. We played a lot of the same venues and done a lot of the same kinds of things. But I always want to get the backstory because that's really important, not just for me, but for anybody listening. So let's begin at the beginning. Why in the world did you go down the road of becoming a live performing musician?
I think it had something to do with the fact that it was a lot safer than football and it got just as many girls. I'll be honest about it. That's pretty much it. Of course, you know, you have to love the music, of course, but my mother was a piano player in church, and I was always around it. So, you know, I was always tinkering with the piano, and then the Beatles came to America, and, you know, and every young guy in the world wanted to buy a guitar. So I saved my money and bought a guitar, and I played trumpet in band, you know, so I don't remember not being around it.
Wow. That's interesting. Now, again, as I said, I've kind of moved a lot of different places. I'm in Frisco, Texas, north of Dallas, been here for 27 years, but you're originally from South Carolina, is that right?
No, actually, I grew up near Grifton, North Carolina, down in the eastern part of the state.
Okay.
And I lived in Raleigh a while, but I ended up gravitated to the Charlotte, North Carolina area, and I've lived just across the line from Charlotte in Fort Mill, South Carolina, since 1990. So I've been here 20 some odd years. Going on 33 years now. So,
wow.
But basically I'm in the Charlotte metro area, just like you're in the Dallas metro area.
Yeah, absolutely. I played Charlotte many occasions, and we should probably visit about some of that offline because some of those memories are better than others, and some are more humiliating than others. But anyway, I guess the big question, you mentioned that music is in fact safer than football. I know that because both of our sons play high school ball. One of them played college ball, but it is safer. And, you know, it's interesting. All of us, I think, that grew up with rock and roll in the 60s and 70s were certainly interested in the girls aspect of thing, which is kind of amusing.
Without a doubt. Of course we were.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Like me, you didn't start off as a solo performer, did you, Freddy?
No, I was always in larger groups from 4 pieces on up. And in fact, the last 30 plus years of my career, I've been in 7, 8, 9-piece bands until about 4 years ago when I actually retired. I was with the group for the better part of 30 years called the Fantastic Shakers, which we were a variety show band. And of course, in the Carolinas, we play what we call beach music, which is basically watered down Motown blues and that sort of stuff. And horn bands, and I was a horn player some of the time, a keyboard player some of the time, and some of the you know. So I did a lot of different things, but my parents' health situation dictated I quit traveling for a while, and I did until about a year and a half ago when I got my, you know, dad situated. I said, well, I don't want to quit playing music, but I don't really want to delve into the work required to get another band going and things like that. So I said, well, let's give this solo thing a try, because I had done, you know, a lot of production work in the pack. And in fact, for about 20 some years, I did, I worked for Sound Choice, did contract work for them and did background accompaniment tracks for a number of times. So that got me my feet wet into the production side of it, and then moved on from there into doing record production, things like that. So I says, well, you know, I can do the tracks, and I can play the piano, and I can play some guitar, play some horn, and sing. So that's how it all evolved into the solo thing.
That's very cool. Let me interject something for those of you that ever have the chance to see the Fantastic Shakers or saw them in the past. You know what I'm talking about. One of the great bands in the Southeast, and always loved everything you guys did. In fact, you won some awards, which we'll get to in a moment. But
Sure.
what I want to talk about is, come high school, I think most of us that have learned a musical instrument at some point start thinking, well, I think I'd rather do this than that, right? My
Right.
oldest son actually plays some bass guitar, but he was 6'7" and 275 as a junior in
Wow.
high school. So it was rather obvious that he could play football if he wanted, and he pursued that. But as you pointed out earlier, it is safer. At what point did you decide, or when did you start actually physically playing in bands? How old were you?
It was between the time I was 15 and 16, and ironically, I had playing neighborhood sandlot football. I had broken my right wrist, and that I was, and then so I had to wear a cast for about 6 or 8 weeks, and I couldn't even really do anything with my trumpet. And then I had dropped out of band, and because I couldn't finger my trumpet. But then when I got my cast off, but my best friend, in fact, my best friend to this day, Jimmy Smith, was playing in a band and playing trumpet. He said, they had a little working band, and I knew all the guys. He said, we wouldn't mind adding another horn. You think you'd be interested in it? And I kind of said, well, I never really thought about doing that. Of course, I had already played some guitar and all. I said, well, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And it turned out, and it ended up being pretty good. And hey, it always comes back to the girls. The first, I'll never forget the first job I was at a teen club for a New Year's party at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, Marine base near where we grew up.
I know exactly where it is. Played it several times.
Oh yeah, and then this cute little girl walks by right in front of the stage and winks at me, and well, it was over. And that was 1968. and of course that wasn't the only reason, but that was the determining factor. And then over the years, it's just something I just kind of always did, and I've never really took, even with getting in and out of college and going to college for a while, dropping out, touring for a little bit, going back to college, which took a long time for me to get through with college, but that's another matter. But I never really stopped. I never really stopped playing, except for just a couple of brief periods of time since that time, and I was lucky enough to, over the course of years, to eventually get in some bands that were working and could actually make a living in it, doing something you enjoy doing, which is why we all do it.
Absolutely, and the girls are just a wonderful, beautiful little perk.
That's exactly right.
By the way, I'll just toss this out. This has been a crazy week for me. I've done 7 shows in 9 days, and Friday night I got hired by the young ladies of Kappa Kappa Gamma over at TCU for a parents' weekend, and that was a lot of fun. I haven't played for girls that young and haven't played at a sorority in years and years, but it was fun, and they seemed to enjoy what we did, and I'm grateful for that. So yes,
sure.
the girls part of it is still very much a part of the package. So
the girls just got older. That's all.
Yeah, and in the case of the girls Friday night, I just got older, and they're still young, and they had a ball. It was a lot of fun. So when you started doing more with music, at some point, right, you have to sit down and put in some time, whether it's on the piano or whether it's trumpet or whatever. And I know, because I've seen your web page, by the way, which anybody wants to go to it, it's Freddy Tripp Music, and we'll put a link in there a little bit later.
Thanks.
But I know that when you were playing trumpet, you said, in band, probably like junior high school and high school band?
Oh yeah, yeah. I exactly started about the 6th grade and played it on up through the 10th grade, and then I got involved with rock and roll. So that kind of changed. Well, I use the term rock and roll very loosely, but started playing in bands, and luckily enough, even at that point, was able to work with bands that played on a regular basis. So and that's the main thing. You can sit there and practice by yourself for days and days and days until you get out there and actually do it. You don't learn the skills that's necessary to do it, more than just once in a while. And in fact, and then the entertainment value. Once you get in front of the audience, you learn how to entertain folks a whole lot better. And that's the main thing. I mean, it's Steely Dan can get up there and play and wow everybody in the audience, especially the musicians. But I've seen people that can entertain crowds better than that. They don't have necessarily the pristine level of musicianship. That's always desirable for everybody, but the entertainment factor is what always seems to relate to the audience better than the other aspect of it. Is the way I look at it.
I'm gonna toss something out to you that I think here you might agree with. Would you suggest for folks like ourselves that have been really career musicians that that's probably as important as anything?
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt. It's especially doing it by yourself because you don't have anybody else you can rely on to do this or that or the other. You're never really in the background. You're the foray of what they're looking at, what they're listening to. You're the center of attention. So you really do have to, and a big smile goes a long way.
Yeah,
It goes a long way. And interacting with them, and I've used, wasn't it Frank Sinatra said one time? He says, "Well, when you get to that note's coming up that you don't think you can quite hit, I would just reach over my coat, pull my handkerchief out, and throw it away." Throw it in the air, and it takes their attention from tricks.
Yes, we do learn some tricks along the way. So we're going back high school. You're playing in band until 10th grade, and then you just stop because you started playing some gigs, right?
Correct.
And when you had started that, was this gigs solely on trumpet, or were you doing a little bit of keyboards or guitar too?
Initially just trumpet, and then what basically evolved, when I was in my 20s and all, and I was the group was kind of traveling pretty much all over the Southeast, and the music, you have to kind of react to the way music changes. And during that time period, when the foray of synthesizers and things like that came into, there was a lot of stuff. If you wanted to cover it live, you basically, you basically needed a keyboard player with 3 or 4 hands, or you had to have 2 keyboards. So I started out, I guess, in the early mid '70s. I was kind of like that, a trumpet player and a secondary keyboard player. And then as time evolved, for one reason or the other, I left one time a touring band. I went back to college. Well, where I went to college, there wasn't a lot of gigs for a weekend trumpet player playing, but keyboard player didn't have any trouble finding a gig. So I bought a Fender Rhodes piano and started playing keys. So, and over the years, it's over the last 30 years or so, it's been probably 75% keyboards, and then throwing the trumpet in where it fits, just depending on the group lineup at the time. And then I'd always played a little bit of guitar, but I'd never really gotten any level of guitar chops until the last few years, because I haven't had to. I always was fortunate enough to work in bands that had great guitar players. So I wasn't going to get in the way of that. But once I started doing the solo thing, and I started doing a very wide variety of stuff, from the pop stuff, the Motown stuff, the standards, the country stuff, and things like that, I found out, well, you know what? Playing these country songs really does need that strum and acoustic guitar in there, because I didn't want it to sound like it was totally canned. I wanted to throw the realistic at it, which I'm sure we'll address that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about college for a moment, because you did something I did. You didn't know this. We kind of live parallel universes, just in different parts of the state. I started at NC State University in Raleigh, and was there a year and a half, took a year off. I was playing with the Men of Distinction. They were on the road for a year. So I took a year off, came back. I think I did a semester, did another year off, and then finally transferred to UNC Chapel Hill, where I ultimately graduated 6 years after I began. So tell me about your music. And one other thing, let me ask before we go to college. Did you have any formal training besides the fact that mom played the piano and you had taken trumpet at school? Did you have any formal education on piano or trumpet or guitar or anything
That
like that?
that was pretty much it. But
Okay.
yes, pretty much self-taught. And I realized back that particularly once I sat down at the keyboards, I kind of needed to learn theory so I could put things together. And I did. I did take some. At the time, they weren't online courses, but they were like, I read a lot. I read a lot, and and learned. Basically, had to learn how chords fit together, how scales fit together, and things like that. And the other stuff kind of make that kind of go along where hey, this really all does make sense. So
Yeah.
anybody that whatever wherever you get it from, whether it's school or academics or just self-taught, you need to get some of that. It makes the other process, makes everything fit together.
Absolutely. By the way, did she just play by ear, but did she read music as well?
Oh, she could play anything if
Cool.
she read. She wasn't very good at ear though, because she used to
Okay.
always get on me. She says, "You can play every song in the world the first 15 seconds of it." I said, "Well, I'm hearing it and I can put it together, So, I'm more ear taught than anything else. But I did try to get as much formal training without getting to. I wasn't a music major in college. I was a
Yeah,
business
yeah,
major.
yeah. So let's address that now. Where did you go to college and tell me
I
about
went
that?
I went to school at East Carolina University,
Okay.
and it took me longer than 6 years to get out because I did the first thing. First couple of years I did, I majored in something besides business or music. It was pretty much partying, and then I played on the road for a couple of years, and in the mid 70s I went back to college, and basically 10 years after I started, I eventually finished up my undergraduate degree, and I went another year and I got my graduate degree, and
Cool.
then worked 1 year in the corporate world, but that was the end of that.
Well, what did you? Let me first of all just a little disclaimer. My youngest brother went to East Carolina. I've got several dear friends that are pirates. Without
Uh,
disparaging, I will simply say that at any of these schools, North Carolina State, UNC Chapel Hill, where I graduated, certainly East Carolina, if you want to party, there are plenty of opportunities. We'll just leave it
oh, for
there.
sure. Yeah, we can leave that on the table.
So you mentioned what did you major in at East Carolina? Then what grad school? What was that about?
Oh, I majored. I had an undergraduate business administration
Okay.
degree, and then I went on, and because I had that, I could finish my MBA program in a calendar year. So I did that. I got
Fantastic.
Yeah. So I'm the most educated part-time musician in the world, probably.
Well, let me say this, but Freddie, you've been working for longer than I have, pal, and that's
Yeah.
that's incredible. And it's interesting. I've taught guitar for 36 years now, and I tell our students, if you're going to study anything, a business degree would be really helpful. And in fact, we've covered a lot of business angles with this podcast because a lot of
Sure.
musicians are not in the enviable place. By the way, I want to congratulate you. You're my first interviewee that's got an MBA, and I got
Oh,
to tell you, I'm
oh.
kind of excited about that.
Well,
Uh,
one thing I have found that you do learn in school, you learn a whole. You don't necessarily learn everything you need to do, but you learn a whole lot of things that you shouldn't do. And and kind of going a roundabout way. Even in the last several years, I've always been was always heavily involved, particularly with the Fantastic Shakers and the business aspects of it, and it really ties over because when you're a solo performer, you're the booking agent, you're the manager, you're the talent director, you're the road crew, you're everything. You got to wear a whole lot of hats,
Yes.
and that business acumen really does help us, particularly in the areas of customer service, because some musicians, that have this pure artist temperament, sometimes don't quite grasp the business concept, and that's unfortunate.
Well,
But
that
I
is
think that's what those like yourself and those that are able to keep working and things like that, those that grasp that and make it easier for their customers and the vendors, they're the ones that typically get the most work.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about something else. You mentioned again. There's several little nuggets that I'm trying to resist doing too many rabbit holes at once. But one of the things you said, you were fortunate to work with some people that were able to get work, and let's talk about that for a moment. Because as a musician, if you're not playing gigs, you really aren't sharing the talent that you've been given. And I also think you're not really growing because as you pointed out earlier, you can study all you want, but you get out there and play in front of a gig and actual people, including cute girls that might wink at you, right?
Sure.
It changes the dynamic completely, and all of a sudden you find out very quickly, I can do this, but I can't do that, right?
That's very much so. From my own personal aspects, the way it kind of evolved was you have to work at it a little bit every day. Not just the music side, but you also got to work on the promotion side. You got to work on making sure that your repertoire is the type of stuff that as broader an appeal as possible, rather than trying to pigeonhole myself. Well, guitar. I only want to play Seattle grunge or heavy metal or something like that. Well, good luck with that. Hope that works out for you.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
and I know you probably do this as well. The
Absolutely.
gambit of my repertoire goes from one. I do everything from Frank Sinatra to a Bruno Mars and a Zach Brown
Yeah.
and Drifters, or
Yeah.
and a wide range. The more stuff you can play, the more people you're able to appeal to, and you're able to tailor your performance to is you want, after a while you learn to read your audience and see what they're reacting to.
Absolutely. And David Fortune, who was not only one of my guitar students, but has a really successful show down in South Texas, and encouraged everybody that listens to this podcast to take notes. And if you aren't already, Freddy has already dropped a dozen gems and we're just getting started. So I really encourage you to take notes, go back and listen to this, re-listen to this. And if you use what he's talking about, that makes a big difference. One of the things that I think was really interesting about playing in the Carolinas, I get to think about this a lot because my wife and I were married in Los Angeles. I played gigs out there for 4 years. I've been in Texas for almost 30 years. And one of the things that I will say about most of the North Carolina acts that work a lot, be it you guys or the Embers, the Men of Distinction when I was working with them, whoever it is, and that is these were groups that were not one-trick ponies musically. They could play a lot of different things. They had good players, they had good singers, and they had good business acumen to be able to not only book work, but to get asked back if you do a good job, right?
Oh, that's absolutely correct, because the most important thing is if you've got this group as an audience, they are the most important audience you could possibly have. If you can keep them happy and they book you back, say every 3 or 4 months or every 6 months or even once a year, say if it's a festival or something like that, all of that tends to stockpile over time. And and I'm sure you're the same way. Every day, I've got if it makes it real easy that once you've established this relationship with a client, that and particularly now it's easy. Drop them an email or an occasional phone call. Said, I was wondering if you had anything. If, for example, this morning, I booked with present clients. I booked 4 days into next spring, and I've booked 3 with clients I already had for November and December. So that's the easy part. Now getting new work is important too, but you should never neglect the ones you've already got.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I guess that was
Customer,
your question.
yeah, yeah. Well, you know what? Here's the thing: customer retention, regardless of what you're doing, if you're selling ice cream, if you're
Sure.
selling penny loafers, if you're selling new cars, kitchen appliances, whatever it is, it's important to keep people coming back. Did you find, because your schooling took an extended period, did you find that you were able to be helpful for the Shakers or anybody else you're working with in terms of, hey, we might want to reconsider booking this for this price, or we might want to do something? Did you find some of that business things that you learned was helpful in furthering the success of the groups that you were working with at that time?
Absolutely. And I mean, and everything's always a negotiation, and the more accommodating you can be, the more likely you are for them to call you back. And I'm not just talking about just on the money, because a lot of times it does come down to the money. But I know that there were several, and I use the Shakers example because that was my longest tenure. But there were several different festivals that we would do every year, and when you do them like that, it was very rare. And we wouldn't do it until over a long period of time would we ever adjust the money up. In other words, say for example, we booked a festival for $4,000,
Yeah.
and they call back. Well, I'm not going to go up to $5,000 the next year. I don't care how much they like, and that sort of thing over time. I would much rather book it 4 times for $4,000 than 1 time for 5,000.
Yes.
And so you have to work with your clients, particularly if there's budgets involved. It depends on the scenario. Now, if this guy's if this bride's mother has got inlet deep pockets with no bottom, that might be a little bit matter. You have to kind of play that by ear. It's all a business situation, because long-term customers are a whole lot better than one-trick pony, so to speak.
No question about it. No question about it. So a couple of other things. You've done some very interesting things along the way. You're a very successful songwriter. You want to talk about songwriting for a moment?
I can. I'm not nearly as good a songwriter as I'd like to be. Most of the songs that I wrote were because it was tailored toward the particular groups that I was in at the time, particularly the Shakers, because we did I produced like 10 or 12 CDs with that group over the course of time, and on each one of course we would do some covers because we always had somebody coming up to us, they hear us do a song on a live performance. And when 15 to 20 of them, y'all should record that. Y'all should, after you hear it 10 to 20 times, they said, maybe we should record it. They want to hear this song. So, but always try to include 2 or 3 originals. And we kind of knew, because our stuff was so dance oriented, particularly for the Carolinas market, we wrote songs to kind of appeal to that with the type of rhythm and the type of tempo and the song structure like that. Songwriting is something that and as time has gone on, it's a whole lot easier for me to write on a collaborative basis than it is with others. But and I think nowadays, particularly say for the Nashville people, you might hear a Nashville top record might have 10 songwriters.
Yeah.
Because everybody puts their 2 cents in. But generally, that's going to make the song better and make the song have a little bit more longevity. Because I'm a much better music person than I am a lyric writer. My daughter writes songs as well. Used to write songs. She was much rather on the lyric side. Of course, I couldn't ever write her down. She didn't want to write songs about what I want to write about. But that being said, she learned early on that that having the input of somebody else does tend to make the product a little bit better, makes the song better, and it's all about the song anyway. It's not about necessarily you want the performance to be as good as possible, but if the song's great, anybody can sell it. If the song stinks, nobody can sell it.
That really is true. And if you think about it, if you look at your song list, for example, a lot of times I'll have folks come up to me at a gig and say, do you play so-and-so or such and such? And it's an obscure song that this person really loves. And like you, I use tracks, and we'll get into that probably in the next episode. But because I use tracks, I tell people, I said, I try and do things that have the greatest appeal to the biggest audiences.
Certainly.
And if I'm going to add a song, I know how much time it's going to cost me to do that personally, and I want to be sure that I'm investing my time into something that's worthwhile. Now, obviously, for musicians that just get up there with a song lyric and a chord sheet, it might not require that much effort. But for folks like Freddy and I that use production in our shows to sound as good as we possibly can, that's an important thing. But you've actually won some awards. Let's talk about that for a moment, because I was really impressed. I didn't know this.
Well, I don't like to toot my own horn, but
that's why you're here, Freddie. I want you to toot your own horn. You're a horn player, brother. You got to toot your own horn.
Okay, I didn't. I was speaking metaphorically. Well, like I said, I was fortunate enough to be in some groups that had success, and once I got into record production with the Fantastic Shakers, we had the Carolina Beach Music Awards gives awards for groups of the year, song of the year, album of the year, CD of the year, things like that. And we were fortunate enough to win about 20 of those over the course of years. And I produced out of that group, there was 4 albums or CDs that I produced that were album of the year. And it was, and also Shakers were inducted into the North Carolina Music Hall of Fame while I was with them. And of course, we've been, and as a result of what I've done, I won an award. I was inducted into the Carolina Beach Music Hall of Fame back in 2012. Uh, so the awards is good. It's something good to hang on the wall, and maybe my daughter will appreciate it. Say, well, my dad wasn't a total loss.
Well,
So,
it's interesting because you've done the same thing that I have, and that
uh,
is you're a married guy, you raised a family being a
sure,
performer. You want to address that for a little bit because I think it takes a certain kind of woman to be married to somebody like ourselves, or if it's a lady doing it, a certain kind of man to support that. But it also requires kind of the assistance and at least support from the children, right?
oh, exactly. And my daughter was. I never pushed my daughter in the direction of music as a career. She kind of, she always sang from the time she was a small child and was probably a lot better than average. And she, she, she got it. She just kind of got it. But there was a period in time when I was touring that I was touring a lot. Say when my daughter was 3 or 4 years old. At the time, she was getting into middle school, and I traveled from New York to the tip of Florida and some points west. And when I was with the Embers, which was only a couple of years, but then I ended up coming back to the Shakers because we tended to keep our performances in a more compact area, and I was home a lot more. I still had to travel, but I wasn't away from home quite as long as stretches as I was. Their base was about 3 hours from where I live now, so that made it a little bit difficult. Spent a lot of time on the tour, but I had great experiences. Every experience I've had has been the way I look at it, a learning process and another step along the way to get to where you are. And my wife was very supportive from I was doing it when I met her, and from the time she's never it makes a difference when you got a family that supports what you do. As long as you do what you're supposed to do as best you can do it, most of the time a reasonable human being is going to understand it. And it helped that I got married later in life too. So
Well, you know what? Angelica and I got married a couple months before my 28th birthday, and I think that probably was good for her and for me. We're
sure,
fortunate we raised 4 children. One of the decisions that I made, and it's interesting you talk about being on tour and things like that. I was involved with a group in California that was actually in management negotiations about doing a record and all that, and the guy wanted a 5-year commitment. And I knew what that meant because I had been on the road with a group called Still Creek Band in the early 80s.
sure.
We played over 305 nights a year.
Wow,
And
yeah,
what that means is, for those of you guys that have never worked that much, that means you leave in January, get home in July, or you leave in July, get home in January. You work 6 nights a week, and the day off is often a travel day because you're going from one town to the next. And we played mostly hotels and things like that. And I realized what that was involved with, so I had to pull back on that. That's when I made the decision to teach guitar and play mostly on weekends. And that worked out, and that diminished the travel for me. But I was fortunate that my wife and my children had supported what I've done. In fact, it's kind of cool now because Angelica will actually come often to me with gigs. And if we've got a trip, for example, if I'm going to San Antonio or we're going up to Kansas, we played a birthday party or a wedding anniversary in central Kansas this summer. And that's about
oh,
an 8-hour drive. So we'll just make a little weekend of it, and it's a lot of fun. I'm grateful to have that support. But one of the things that I think people that are listening would want to know is, obviously you learned a ton of things along the way to be able to be a songwriter, to be successful as a songwriter, to be successful with the gigging, to help in terms of probably the marketing and the business aspect of things. But you also have quite a bit of knowledge about the recording studio, don't you?
well, I had alluded to this uh, a while back in the late '80s, early '90s. It kind of by accident, I had my wife gave me a piece of recording software for Christmas one year, and I was really just starting to get into the MIDI thing, and so I was learning, and so a friend of mine was doing contract work for Sound Choice, and I talked to him about it. He says, "Well, they're growing real fast, and they need more programmers and this, that, and I said, "Well, I had started on my keyboard sequencer. I was able to do that. I said, "Well, I think I can equate it to this." And as a result, for over 15, 20 years, I was a regular programmer, and I did probably 2,000 songs, and it was every genre in the world. And what happened was, as a result, you're listening to the production of some of the best producers in the music. You're trying to replicate that sound, and you learn those little tricks, what it takes. Well, I need this. Number one, I need to be able to pick out this piano part. Number two, I need to be able to pick out this string part, and I need to make this string sound as real as possible. And then over the course of time, you just got better at it. And in the mid 2000s, a buddy of mine and we actually opened a recording studio in Charlotte, which we had for about 6 years. And so we did everything from, that was during we started out on 16 trap Atari tape machine, and then we went to ADATs, then we went to the 20-bit ADATs, then we went to the hard disk ADATs, then we went to the software recording. So I got to evolve, and in order to do that, you have to learn the steps along the way. And we had that studio for about 5 years, and then the city of Charlotte put a light rail system in right by where we were. So my partner and I basically split our gear up. He went one way and I went the other. And I said, well, you know what? I'd still like to record, and I've got to have space. So my wife and I, talking about having spousal support, my wife decided, she said, well, we can add on to the house. So she got her sun porch. I got my recording space. And I basically have a 20 square foot room. I've got an isolation booth, a 9x8 isolation booth. So I'm able to record, 90% of what I did when I had the commercial recordings.
That's fantastic. I want you to pause right there. We're going to wrap up. Okay. This is the end of podcast 1. We'll be back in just a little bit. Again, you're listening to the Band of One podcast. I'm Riding Wilson with my special guest, Freddy Tripp. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on our next episode.